Before I begin, please tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are watching me. I didn't think much of it when he said he had a surprise planned for my birthday. He'd been acting strange all week, extra attentive, overly calm, like someone sitting on a secret they weren't sure how to unwrap. I figured it was flowers, maybe a small dinner, something predictable. When the knock came at the door, I wasn't even dressed yet. He smiled at me in that careful way he does when he's waiting for a reaction. "Just trust me," he said. And then he opened the door. It was our neighbor, the one we waved to in the mornings, the one who helped with the trash cans, the one who always lingered a second too long in conversation but never crossed a line. He stood there awkwardly, holding a bottle of wine, clearly unsure if he should be inside or not. I looked at my husband, then back at our neighbor. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. "This is part of it?" I asked. My husband nodded, calm, certain, like he'd already played this moment out in his head. "I thought you might like the company," he said, "for tonight." There was no pressure in his voice, no command, just an offer placed gently in front of me. That's what made it unsettling. We stood there for a few seconds too long, the kind of silence where everyone is deciding who's going to move first. I could have said no. I could have laughed it off and closed the door. But instead, I stepped aside. And that small movement, barely noticeable, changed the entire night. Once he was inside, everything felt strangely normal. That was the part I wasn't prepared for. We sat at the table like we always did when we had someone over. Wine poured, small talk, laughing about nothing important. If someone had looked through the window, they would have thought it was just another quiet night between neighbors. But underneath it, there was a current running through the room. I could feel it every time our neighbor glanced at me and then quickly looked away. Every time my husband reached for my hand a little longer than usual. Every time the conversation paused for half a beat too long. At one point, our neighbor cleared his throat and said, "If this is weird, I can go." I looked at my husband before answering. He didn't speak. He just watched me. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't really about the neighbor. This was about whether I trusted my husband enough to step into something unfamiliar. Together. "It's okay," I said. "You can stay." The relief on his face was obvious. Not excitement. Relief. Like he'd been holding his breath since the door opened. We moved to the living room after that. The lights were lower, music playing quietly in the background. The wine doing what wine always does, softening the edges of everything. I sat between them on the couch without thinking about it. No one touched me. And somehow, that made it more intense. The space between knees, the warmth, the awareness of every small movement. My husband's hand resting casually on the back of the couch behind me. Our neighbor sitting just close enough that I could feel his presence without contact. It felt deliberate, careful, like all three of us were silently agreeing that whatever happened next would only happen if everyone leaned in. And I did. Not all at once, just enough to let them know I wasn't pulling away. That's when I noticed something I hadn't expected at all. Neither of them looked nervous. They were watching me, waiting. The shift was subtle, but once it happened, there was no pretending it hadn't. My husband leaned forward first, not to touch me, just to speak. "If at any point this doesn't feel right," he said calmly, "we stop." There was no performance in his voice, no bravado, just certainty. I nodded. Our neighbor swallowed hard, then gave a small smile. Same here. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't impulsive. It was careful, considered, almost respectful in a way I hadn't expected. I exhaled slowly and leaned back into the couch, not away from either of them, into the space we were all sharing. The room felt quieter after that. Not silent, but focused. Like everyone was suddenly aware of how close we were sitting, how warm it had gotten, how the air itself felt heavier. My husband reached for my hand. Just my hand. The simple contact sent a pulse through me. Not because it was new, but because of who was watching and who wasn't looking away. Our neighbor shifted slightly, angling his body, not toward me directly, but closer. Present. Attentive. Still careful. No one rushed anything. Time stretched in that strange way it does when something unfamiliar starts to feel possible. When your instincts argue with your expectations, and then quietly win. I remember thinking how strange it was that I felt safe. Not confused, not overwhelmed, just aware. Aware of my husband beside me. Aware of our neighbor's quiet presence. Aware that this night had already become something we'd never talk about casually again. And instead of pulling back, I found myself smiling. Because whatever this was becoming, we were all choosing it. I don't know who moved first. That's the honest truth. There wasn't a signal, no sudden decision, just a slow closing of distance that felt almost inevitable once it started. My husband squeezed my hand gently, like he was checking in without saying it out loud. When I didn't pull away, he relaxed. I felt it immediately. Our neighbor noticed too. He didn't touch me, not yet. He just shifted closer, enough that our shoulders brushed for the first time. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but none of us treated it that way. No one apologized. The music kept playing softly, like it was trying not to interrupt us. I remember how aware I was of my own breathing, how every inhale felt deliberate, how every exhale felt like permission. My husband leaned in and kissed my cheek. Something simple, familiar, grounding. And then he did something that surprised me. He looked at our neighbor and said, "You're okay, right?" Not possessive, not territorial, inclusive. Our neighbor nodded, his voice low when he answered, "Yeah, I am." That was when I realized this wasn't about lines being crossed. It was about trust being shared. The three of us sat there for a moment longer, close enough now that there was no mistaking what this night had become. The tension didn't feel reckless anymore. It felt intentional, like we were moving together instead of pulling in different directions. And instead of feeling like I was losing control, I felt strangely centered. Whatever happened next wouldn't be a mistake. It would be a memory we all chose to create, together. The rest of the night didn't unfold the way people imagine when they hear a story like this. There was no sudden rush, no moment where everything tipped over all at once. Instead, it stayed quiet, intentional. We talked more than I expected. About small things at first, work, memories, how strange it felt to sit there knowing we'd crossed into something new without really crossing anything at all yet. At one point, our neighbor laughed softly and shook his head. "I never thought I'd be sitting here like this," he said. Neither did I. My husband smiled at that, the kind of smile that said he was paying attention to both of us at the same time. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I don't hate it." That honesty settled something in the room. I shifted slightly, resting back against the couch, and felt my husband's arm slide around me. Not to pull me closer, just to be there. Our neighbor didn't move away. He stayed exactly where he was, present without pressing. It felt balanced. What surprised me most was how natural it became, how the awkwardness faded, how the tension softened into something warmer. We weren't trying to impress each other. We weren't proving anything. We were just there, sharing a space, a moment, a night that would never repeat itself in quite the same way. When the wine was gone and the music ended, no one rushed to fill the silence. Eventually, our neighbor stood up, hesitating for just a second before saying, "Thank you for trusting me." I looked at my husband before answering. He nodded. "Thank you for respecting us," I said. After the door closed behind him, my husband and I sat there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. "You okay?" he asked. I leaned into him and smiled. "Yeah, I really am." And I meant it. Because sometimes, enjoyment doesn't come from doing something extreme. Sometimes it comes from realizing that trust, honesty, and choosing the moment together can be enough. The next morning felt different, but not in the way I expected. There was no tension hanging in the air, no awkward glances, no unspoken panic about what needed to be fixed. We woke up slowly, sunlight creeping in through the blinds. My husband moved around the kitchen like it was any other day, making coffee, humming under his breath. That's when it hit me. Nothing was broken. When he handed me a mug, he looked at me carefully. Not suspicious, not worried, just present. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a second. About the night before. About the trust. About how calm it all felt once we stopped overthinking it. "I feel honest," I said. He nodded, like that answer mattered more than anything else I could have said. We didn't talk about our neighbor right away. There was no need to dissect it. No need to label it or turn it into something bigger than it was. Later that afternoon, when I stepped outside to grab the mail, I saw him across the street. He hesitated when he noticed me, then gave a small, respectful nod. I nodded back. No lingering looks, no awkward smiles, just understanding. That's when I realized what made the night special wasn't what people would assume. It wasn't about crossing lines or chasing thrills. It was about choosing openness over fear, trust over control, curiosity without regret. My birthday came and went. The story stayed with us, but quietly. Something we carried, not something we advertised. And yes, we all enjoyed it. Not because it was wild, but because it was real. I didn't share this to shock anyone. I shared it because moments like this don't fit into neat boxes, and pretending they don't happen doesn't make them disappear. What matters isn't the details people fixate on. It's the honesty that holds everything together. That night didn't change who we were. It clarified it. We learned that trust isn't fragile when it's real, that communication can open doors without tearing anything down, and that enjoyment doesn't always look loud or reckless. Sometimes it's quiet, mutual, and grounded. Life went on. Our marriage stayed intact. Our neighbor stayed respectful. And the memory stayed where it belonged, between the people who chose it. Not everything meaningful needs an audience. Some stories just need to be told once, truthfully. If this resonated with you, or made you think differently about trust and connection, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And remember, sometimes the moments that surprise us the most are the ones that teach us who we really are.